Hopefully the timing here works out right. Thanks so much, Mary Ann. And good morning, and thank you all again for joining us today. I'm Dr. Adrian Carper. I'm a postdoctoral researcher in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at the University of Colorado Boulder. And I'd like to especially thank all of the attendees today here in Colorado and elsewhere who may have been impacted by our state's recent wildfires or by COVID-19 or by other economic hardships, who still make time to follow their interests in pollinators and pollinator conservation. Undoubtedly, all of us here today have had friends or family impacted by these or other challenges of our time, and we've all been forced to adapt to these changes, to develop strategies to mitigate their impact, and to seek help from others in order to create healthy and safe environments for ourselves and our loved ones. And this summit is no different. We're coming to you today virtually, and I know things could have been smoother, but we're working, all of us, to make sure that we have as smooth a transition as possible. I'd like to personally, and on behalf of all of us working on the summit, thank One Media and especially Booth Central for their tireless efforts to help us bring you a summit that is hopefully informative, engaging, and meaningful. If at any time you have questions, feel free to visit the help booth here on the main page or to ask questions using Booth Central's support linked at the bottom of this page. Okay, so time for a bit of my stump speech. So I promise after I get done, we're going to have a little more lighthearted fun. But it should come as no surprise to you, our attendees, that over the past couple of decades, scientists and the general public have become increasingly aware of and concerned about the health and diversity of Colorado's pollinators. However, many are still unaware or indifferent to the signs of declining biodiversity, including pollinators whose services we rely on, and all of us depend on and benefit from pollinators, whether through the food that they help us produce or the ecosystems that they help us maintain. Thriving and diverse pollinator communities are not only essential to our own human health and well-being, they provide critical pollination services that nearly all terrestrial ecosystems rely on. However, human-induced biodiversity loss is undoubtedly one of the biggest challenges of our time, and pollinators are no exception. Nonetheless, we've learned a great deal about pollinator responses to human environmental change, and we are all of us, tasked with making the most of this knowledge to help inform and impact pollinator conservation efforts. And just like we have all learned to adapt to the other challenges of our time, so too must we adapt to the challenges of pollinator conservation, and that's no easy task. As we learn more about pollinators and how they respond to human environmental change, we must convey that information to a broad audience, including those represented by our 4 organized sessions today: scientists and researchers, educators, land managers, and policymakers. Moreover, we must negotiate both conceptually, but also practically, the impediments to conservation action. This includes not only developing strategies to more effectively bridge disciplines and streamline conservation actions, but also to mitigate potential conflicts between diverse audiences, stakeholders, and across diverse socioeconomic and cultural divides. The latter is especially important as conservation is by definition a value-driven field. We can serve what we value, and different groups of people value different things. And that's what makes conservation so hard sometimes. For example, one of the biggest impediments to pollinator conservation is a lack of understanding about pollinator diversity. If you don't understand something, you likely place less value on it. And so educating people about the sheer diversity of Colorado's pollinators is difficult just because they are so diverse. And teaching about the complicated networks of plant-pollinator interactions is difficult because they are so complex, right? And so that's why I do as many outreach talks as I can as a scientist to help people educate others, right? From a management or policy perspective, the lack of evidence of local or regional declines in pollinators is a huge hurdle. On the one hand, finding researchers to help fill in those gaps in our knowledge is really key to a more comprehensive understanding of how pollinator communities are changing. But on the other hand, we know a lot about how communities in other regions are changing in response to human environmental change. And in all likelihood, similar mechanisms are going on here in Colorado and leading to similar stresses on our pollinators and their interactions with plants. And so synthesizing that kind of information and disseminating it is really crucial to impacting management and policy. And so ultimately, through this summit, we hope to bring together a really broad audience of researchers, educators, managers, and policy experts to first explore the state of pollinator conservation in Colorado, and then to identify some of the impediments to conservation action here in Colorado and beyond. And so our goals today will be to introduce concepts and practices within these organized sessions that address pollinators or their conservation, and to create dialogue within each corresponding panel and between them to explore how professionals and non-professionals alike can help increase the impact of these disciplines on pollinator conservation. And so while I hope you enjoy our live sessions today, I really hope that you take the time to join the breakout tables, the posters, the vendors, and in separate conference rooms to discuss with others your perceptions on the topics that we're presenting here. Remember, understanding where others come from, what they value, and where they need help is really critical to identify ways in which we can advance our shared conservation goals. Okay. So that's my stump speech. I'm going to turn totally 180 in personality and say, how about something a little more fun? So let me just quick screen share. So hopefully everybody, when we first got going, got to see this slide up on the main feed. We're going to be using some polling software in order to try and keep things a little more interesting and engaging. And so you can do this on your smartphone, your tablet, or your computer. If you have a web browser open, all you got to do is go to this page, pollev.com/Darren David So 574. And big shout out to Darren Davidson from CSU Extension, who helped put together this polling software for us. Once you go to that website, you'll be presented with questions as I activate them, and we can look at real-time responses. If you're using your smartphone, you can simply start a new text, and you can text Darren David So 574 to the number 2233, and you can simply text in your response, and we should be able to see your answers. And so that's really good, because right now we're going to try doing the very first one. So, whoops, somebody's already answered my questions. So here's a word cloud. Hopefully people are familiar with these. So I'm gonna text Darren David So to 22333 right now, so I can join in personally. Where are you from? I'm coming from Golden, Colorado. Boom, there it is, Golden. So let's see what people populate here in just a few moments. A lot of Colorado people, no big shock there. Type in something else if you can. Denver is really well represented. The size of these words represent how many of those responses are coming in. Look at this. We got Utah, Fort Collins, the Midwest, Lakewood, a lot of places around Denver, right? So there are people all over Colorado that are joining us today, and from everywhere else. I keep looking for something in the UK there, but I don't see it yet. So, man, it's still going, right? And I think this is really indicative of just how widespread concern about pollinators has become, right? And so people all over Colorado and beyond are really worried about pollinators and their conservation, right? So we've got a lot of people who are really concerned. I think there was over 300 registrants for this conference, and they're from all over, right? And so what about the next one? What group of organisms do you think are most important as Colorado's pollinators? All you got to do is type in a letter here, A, B, C, D, or E. Do you think it's bats, bees, beetles, birds, or butterflies? I don't know why pollinators in Colorado's all start with bees, but you know, you might be able to guess, study bees, so that's no problem for me. Looks like, without a doubt, people are already coming to consensus that bees are really, really important as pollinators. Some people like the beetles. No question that beetles pollinate flowers, and in some ecosystems are really, really important, and they have specialized interactions with some plants. Bats, again, not so much in Colorado, but the further southwest you go, bats are really important in structuring some of our floral communities. And of course, our hummingbirds and our butterflies, just to name a few. There are many more groups of pollinators. But we're seeing an interesting trend. Most people have already identified bees, right? And there's no question, and the bees are probably our most important group of pollinators. And so given that bees are so important, how many species of bees do you think are here in Colorado? I study bees. Oh, we got early off the bat, 10,000 species people thought, 1,000 species people thought. We got some tens, some hundreds. Oh, look at it shifting around. I hope y'all can see this in real time. It's kind of fun. So it looks like everybody realizes there's more than one species of bee, right? We're coming in close here. It looks like a consensus on more of along 1,000 different species, right? Man, I think there's a lot of people who are really like knowledgeable about pollinators here at this conference. So yeah, it's actually pretty close to 1,000 different species of bees. Y'all are smart. I was trying to catch you on that one. Okay, now onto some hard ones. Which of these organisms is a bee, right? And so when we're looking out in the field for bees, we're looking at a tiny little insect on a flower, and we have to try to differentiate what it is. So here's some tiny pictures of an organism that was on a flower. Which one of these do y'all think is a bee? Is it A, B, C, D, E, or do you think F, they're all bees? Let's give it just a second. I mean, A looks very bee-like. It's orange like a honeybee. Man, B looks like a bumblebee. So does C. D looks very wasp-like, doesn't it? And then E just looks kind of like a wasp as well. I'm curious to see what people think. I just told you how diverse bees were. We got a lot of people saying A, right? A looks very bee-like. So let's see. So there's all those images. This includes all the images on that slide, including that big thing that looks like a honeybee right at the top. The reality is none of these are bees. All three of these on the far left are all wasps, yellow jackets, flower wasps, sand wasps. Everything in the middle are flies, and everything on the right are actually butterflies or moths, I'm sorry. That's pretty crazy, right? Why did I throw this up there? Why did I show you, try and trick you into trying to identify a bee? It's because bees are so diverse, right? This is a bee. This is a picture of Holcopasites heliopsis that Sam Droege from the USGS in Maryland took. This doesn't look anything like a bee, right? And yet this is part of the biodiversity of bees. And it does things very differently than what you would think other bees do. And the reality is that bees are extremely diverse, nearly 20,000 species of them around the world, 4,000 species of them here in North America. And Colorado has nearly a quarter of all of those, right? Just here in the Front Range, where most of our attendees today are from, we have 660 different species. And one of the things that I like to point out is that 12 of these are non-native. We do have introduced bees in Colorado, including the Western or formerly European honeybee, right? And so I've circled it here on this slide so you can pick it out from this poster of backyard bees and just how diverse and size and shape and color and morphology all of these different bees are, right? And honeybees, of course, are an extremely important agricultural species to us, but wild bees are so fascinating and diverse. This is one of my favorite, Osmia ribiflorus. This is an early season mason bee that has no common name, right? Most of our wild bee species are really unknown to the public, but they're fascinating. They come in a diversity of shapes and sizes. I mean, just look at this Lithargiopsis on the bottom right. I call this my ninja bee picture. And a big shout out to the CU Museum of Natural History, which has been doing such great work imaging our bee species, which we don't even have pictures of yet. And so you're going to see several of these in our talks. And I also put this up there to illustrate that we still have a lot to learn about our bees, right? And so I work in bee natural history, and there's still a lot we don't know, not only about what species are, where they occur, but also what their interactions with plants are, right? And so these are all different species of cavity nesting bees that use different kinds of materials, plants, leaves, petals, to build their nests. And we know almost nothing about the associations of plants that are used in anything other than collecting pollen or nectar. And so there's a lot of natural history information to learn. And so why have I presented all of you with this information as an intro? Is because I, as a researcher who study bees and bee natural history, really see this as somewhat of an impediment to their conservation, right? Because it's really hard to manage or to conserve something if you don't understand it, right? And so I spend a lot of my time, for example, and what I hope people think from this conference is working collaboratively, right? And so I collaborate with, say, open spaces to study wild bee conservation. And so this is some picture with some Boulder County researchers who I went out and identified really, really strong bee habitat with because they weren't familiar with the different types of bees that were on their Boulder County properties. And this is really important because it allows me not only to get out and have impact on management, but to also ask them for the chance to do my research research, and my research involves students, right? And so in my research, I not only collect data and do all kinds of analyses, but I teach. And so all of my students go out and help collect data and learn to do science and impact management as well. And this has really great, implications outside of teaching in academia. We also use this kind of natural history information to promote general education. And so our project, the Bees Needs, was a citizen science project where we used cavity nesting bees as a model system to teach the public about wild bees. We actually made these kind of bee nest blocks and gave them to the public and let them collect data for us. And so we can get data, we can engage the public in conservation, and we can educate people about the importance and diversity of Colorado's bees. And then, of course, all of this stuff's goal is to affect management, right? And so my students, I not only use my research students, but also my classes. I incorporate, as a lecturer at the University of Colorado, bee conservation and diversity into my lectures. And so this was from my Principles of Ecology course. We actually spent a summer going out and surveying bees on Red Wagon Organic Farm outside Longmont to see whether or not it would be a good candidate for a Xerces Society conservation plan. And so we actually went out, we collected data, we gave this species list to Open Space to let them know what we found on that farm, because they wouldn't know so otherwise. And of course, we publish that. And so while it may not be published in a scientific journal, it's an actual published report for Boulder County that they can use as evidence and data to affect their conservation goals. And so all that from a class. And so I give you all of this information to kind of make you think about how you can bridge outside of your own discipline or your own interests throughout this summit, to think about how we can do this better, how we can better collaborate. And so here's kind of my 3-point guide to the summit for you guys. If I were to give you some guidance throughout this summit, I'd say, to one, put yourself in someone else's shoes, right? I'm a researcher and I've helped develop this conference. Think about what it's like coming from a research perspective. When I go and join a table, I'm going to think about what it's going to be like to be someone who's really passionate about advocating for pollinators, and where we may conflict, or where we may be able to see common ground. And so remember, again, not everyone's values are the same as yours. And think collaboratively, right? How can we better bridge those disciplines, not just to affect better communication, but so that we can build stronger impacts on pollinator conservation? And ultimately, we've all been really stressed lately, I know, right? There's a lot of stresses going on in our life, but be, pun intended, positive, right? There's a lot going for Colorado. We have such an amazing and diverse pollinator community, and we're so lucky to have such a diverse community of people who are interested and dedicated to pollinator conservation here. And so I think you've heard enough from me. We're going to take just a really quick break, just 5 minutes, and then Dave Goulson is going to come in to give the keynote. I'll give a quick introduction to it, and then I'll turn him over here. So if you've got 5 minutes, grab some coffee, and we'll be right back.